Dominic Vance had killed 47 men. He remembered each face, each name, each final breath. But the 3 faces that haunted him weren't his victims, they were the ones he couldn't save. The bitter January wind howled through Chicago's empty streets like a wounded animal. 15 degrees below zero. Snow fell thick and relentless, blanketing the city in white silence, the kind of cold that could kill a man in minutes if he wasn't careful. Inside the black Maybach, Dominic sat motionless in the back seat, his eyes fixed on nothing, his hands, still bearing faint traces of blood beneath the fingernails despite thorough washing, rested on his thighs. Another night, another traitor dealt with, another piece of his soul carved away. Marcus Thompson, his right hand for 12 years, guided the car through the deserted streets. The former Navy SEAL kept his eyes on the road, knowing better than to speak when his boss wore that particular expression. The one that said Dominic Vance had left his body and was wandering somewhere far darker. 2:37 in the morning. The dashboard clock glowed green in the darkness as they passed through South Side, where abandoned buildings stood like rotting teeth against the gray sky. Graffiti covered every surface. Streetlights flickered or stayed dead. This was the forgotten part of Chicago, where even police feared to patrol after midnight. Dominic pressed his forehead against the cold window. His reflection stared back at him, a ghost wearing an expensive suit. 37 years old, but his eyes belonged to someone ancient, someone who had seen too much, done too much, lost too much. The memory came without warning, as it always did. Elena in the morning sunlight, her dark hair falling across her shoulders as she flipped pancakes. Sophia running into the kitchen, her tiny feet pattering against the tile, screaming, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," with all the joy a 3-year-old could hold. His wife turning to smile at him, that smile that made him believe he could be more than a monster. Then blood, so much blood. The kitchen walls painted red, Elena's eyes, still open, staring at nothing, and Sophia Dominic's jaw tightened. He forced the memory back into its cage, but it left claw marks on his insides. 4 years. 4 years since the Castellano family had taken everything from him. 4 years since he had systematically hunted down and destroyed every single person involved. 4 years of existing without living. A strange sound interrupted his thoughts. A grinding noise from somewhere in the engine. "Boss," Marcus said, frowning at the dashboard. "Something's wrong with the car. I need to check it." Dominic nodded once, barely registering the words. Marcus pulled into an abandoned gas station, its pumps rusted, and its windows shattered. The snow had piled against the building's walls, and the only light came from their headlights cutting through the storm. "Stay here. I'll be quick." But Dominic was already opening his door. He needed air. He needed to feel the cold remind him that he was still alive, even if he didn't want to be. He stepped out into the biting wind, his Italian leather shoes crunching against frozen ground. The headlights illuminated the gas station's facade, casting long shadows across the snow. And that's when he saw it. In the corner of the building, half hidden behind a rusted dumpster, something moved. Something small. Something that shouldn't exist in a place like this, on a night like this. Dominic froze. At first, Dominic thought it was garbage. A pile of rags discarded by some homeless person seeking shelter from the storm. Nothing more than trash left to rot in this forgotten corner of Chicago. But trash didn't move. "Marcus," Dominic called, his voice cutting through the howling wind. "Bring the flashlight." Marcus appeared beside him within seconds, sensing the shift in his boss's tone. He pulled out a tactical flashlight and aimed the beam toward the corner where Dominic pointed. The light revealed the truth. It wasn't garbage. It was a child. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, lay curled inside a cardboard box that had once held a refrigerator. She was so small, so impossibly thin, that she looked like a broken doll someone had thrown away. Her body was tucked into a fetal position, knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to preserve warmth. But what stopped Dominic's heart wasn't her size or her position. It was her eyes. They were open, wide open, staring directly at the 2 men who had discovered her hiding place. And in those eyes, there was nothing. No fear, no hope, no plea for help. Just emptiness. The kind of emptiness that came from having every trace of childhood beaten, starved, and frozen out of a person. Marcus took a step closer, and the flashlight revealed more details that made even the hardened former SEAL draw a sharp breath. The girl's lips were cracked and purple from the cold, bleeding in several places. Her left hand clutched a piece of bread so covered in mold that it was more green than brown, yet she held it like it was precious gold. Her jacket, thin as paper and torn in multiple places, exposed her shoulders where scars crisscrossed her pale skin. Old scars, many of them, and her feet, Dear God, her feet. She wore no shoes. Instead, her feet were wrapped in plastic bags, the kind used for groceries, tied around her ankles with rubber bands. The plastic had torn in several places, and her toes, visible through the holes, had turned an alarming shade of blue. Dominic had seen horrors in his lifetime. He had witnessed men tortured beyond recognition. He had looked into the eyes of the dying and the dead. He had created corpses and buried them in places no one would ever find. But this child's eyes, they were different. They reminded him of a photograph. The last photograph police had shown him of Sophia after they found her body. That same vacant stare, that same absence of the spark that should exist in every child. "Boss," Marcus said quietly, reaching for his phone. "I'll call the police." "They can." "No." The word came out harder than Dominic intended. "Put the phone away. We're taking her with us." Marcus hesitated. "Sir, this could be seen as kidnapping. If anyone finds out I own 6 judges and half the Chicago Police Department." Dominic's voice dropped to the temperature of the air around them. "No one will say anything." He watched as Marcus approached the cardboard box and knelt down slowly, carefully, the way one might approach a wounded animal. The girl didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't try to run. When Marcus lifted her from the frozen ground, she weighed almost nothing, like picking up a pillow, like holding air. And still, she didn't move, didn't cry, didn't make a single sound. She simply hung in Marcus's arms, limp and unresisting, like a plastic doll that had forgotten how to be human. Marcus placed the girl in the back seat of the Maybach, and Dominic slid in beside her. The car's heater blasted warm air through the vents, filling the cabin with warmth that should have brought relief to anyone who had been freezing moments ago. The girl didn't react. She sat exactly where Marcus had placed her, motionless as a statue. Her eyes remained open, staring straight ahead at nothing. The warm air washed over her blue-tinged skin, but she didn't shiver, didn't sigh, didn't show any sign that she noticed the change in temperature at all. It was as if her body had forgotten how to feel. Dominic studied her in the dim interior light as Marcus pulled the car back onto the road. Now that they were out of the storm, he could see the full extent of what had been done to this child. Her arms, exposed where the torn jacket failed to cover them, told a story of systematic cruelty. Circular scars dotted her skin in clusters, cigarette burns. Dominic recognized immediately. Someone had used this child as an ashtray, multiple times. Over a long period, his gaze moved to her wrists. Thin lines encircled them like bracelets made of scar tissue. The marks were too uniform, too precise to be accidental. Someone had bound her, with wire, from the look of it, steel wire that had cut into her flesh every time she struggled, and her right hand. The pinky finger bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken at some point and left to heal without medical attention. It jutted outward slightly, a permanent reminder of violence that no child should ever experience. Dominic leaned closer, his voice softer than it had been in years. "What's your name, little one?" The girl turned her head slowly, mechanically, to look at him. Her eyes met his, and Dominic felt something crack inside his chest. Those weren't the eyes of a 7-year-old. They were the eyes of someone who had lived 100 years of suffering compressed into a tiny lifetime. She didn't answer, didn't even open her mouth. "Boss," Marcus said from the front seat, his voice strained. "I found something in her pocket." He passed back a crumpled piece of paper, damp from the snow and worn soft from handling. Dominic unfolded it carefully, smoothing out the creases against his thigh. The words were typed, official, cold. "Lily M., case number 7749B, ward of the state. Foster care. This broken child belonged to the foster care system, the system that was supposed to protect children like her, the system that had clearly, catastrophically failed." A memory surfaced unbidden in Dominic's mind. His mother, standing in the kitchen of their small apartment, clutching a different piece of paper. Divorce documents. Freedom papers, she had called them. The papers she never got to file because his father found them first. His father, who had taught Dominic everything he knew about violence. His father, who had killed her for trying to leave. Dominic folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Take us home, Marcus." His right hand caught his eyes in the rearview mirror. "Sir, with all due respect, this is technically kidnapping a minor. If the authorities I own 6 judges and half the police force in this city." Dominic's voice carried no emotion, only certainty. "When I say we're taking her home, we're taking her home. No one will call it kidnapping. No one will call it anything at all." Marcus nodded once and pressed the accelerator. Beside Dominic, the girl named Lily sat perfectly still, her ancient eyes fixed on nothing, her broken body weighing less than a whisper. The Vance estate rose from the snow-covered grounds like a fortress carved from stone and silence. 30 rooms spread across 3 floors, surrounded by walls topped with security cameras and motion sensors. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter in shifts, their breath forming clouds in the frozen air. It was the safest place in Chicago. It was also the loneliest. Since Elena and Sophia died, the mansion had become a museum of grief. Rooms stayed closed. Laughter had been forbidden. The only warmth came from the heating system, mechanical and impersonal. Eleanor Hayes stood waiting at the front door when the Maybach pulled into the circular driveway. 65 years old, silver-haired, and sharp-eyed, she had served the Vance family for 2 decades. She was the only staff member who remained after the tragedy, the only one Dominic trusted enough to keep. When Marcus carried the small bundle through the door, Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "What happened to this child?" "We found her," Dominic said, his voice flat, "at an abandoned gas station. Prepare a bath. Warm, not hot. Her body temperature is dangerously low." Eleanor didn't ask questions. She had learned long ago that questions in this house led nowhere good. Instead, she moved with the efficiency of someone half her age, leading Marcus up the grand staircase to one of the guest bathrooms. The tub filled with warm water. Steam rose toward the ceiling. Eleanor gently took the girl from Marcus's arms and began removing the torn, filthy clothing. Each layer revealed new horrors. The child's ribs jutted against her skin like the bars of a cage. Her stomach curved inward, hollow from prolonged starvation. This wasn't a child who had missed a few meals. This was systematic deprivation, weeks or months of deliberate neglect. Eleanor's hands trembled as she continued. The girl's back told its own terrible story. Raised scars crisscrossed her spine, the unmistakable marks of a belt or a switch wielded with force. Some were old and faded, others were newer, still pink against her pale skin, and on her left calf, a wound that made Eleanor's stomach turn. Bite marks, deep, curved impressions that could have come from a large dog, or from human teeth. "Dear God," Eleanor breathed. "Who did this to you, child?" Lily didn't answer. She sat in the warm water like a doll placed in a dollhouse bath, showing no reaction to the temperature, no relief at finally being clean and warm. Dominic stood in the hallway outside the bathroom door, his back against the wall. He could hear Eleanor's quiet gasps, her muttered prayers. He didn't need to see what she was seeing. He had seen enough. For 4 years, Dominic Vance had felt nothing. He had hollowed himself out after burying his wife and daughter, becoming a machine that conducted business, eliminated enemies, and breathed without living. But now, standing outside that bathroom, something stirred in the emptiness. Rage. Pure, white-hot rage unlike anything he had experienced since the night he hunted down the Castellano family. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Doctor, Chen, I need you at the estate. Now, no questions." 20 minutes later, Lily lay in a guest bedroom, buried under 3 layers of blankets. Her eyes remained open, staring at the ceiling with that same vacant expression. Eleanor appeared with a bowl of chicken soup, steam curling from its surface. She placed it on the bedside table and sat on the edge of the mattress. "Here, sweetheart. You must be hungry." For the first time since they found her, something changed in Lily's face. Her eyes moved to the bowl. Her nostrils flared slightly at the scent. Slowly, hesitantly, her hand emerged from beneath the blankets. Her thin fingers reached toward the bowl, trembling with weakness and something else. Then she stopped. Her hand hung frozen in the air as her gaze darted around the room, searching, waiting, looking for someone to grant permission, or preparing for punishment. Dr. Nathan Chen arrived at 4 a.m, his medical bag in one hand and questions he knew better than to ask locked behind his teeth. At 50 years old, he had served as the unofficial physician to Chicago's underworld for 2 decades. He had extracted bullets, stitched knife wounds, and pronounced death on men who would never receive official certificates. But he had never been summoned for a child. Eleanor led him to the guest bedroom where Lily sat propped against pillows, her eyes fixed on some invisible point in the darkness. She hadn't touched the soup. She hadn't moved at all. "I need everyone out," Dr. Chen said quietly. "Except you, Eleanor. I'll need assistance." Dominic retreated to the hallway, closing the door behind him. He stood with his back against the wall, arms crossed, listening to the muffled sounds of the examination. The soft instructions, the rustle of blankets, the click of medical instruments. 45 minutes passed before Dr. Chen emerged, his face gray beneath the hallway lights. "My study," Dominic said. "Now, They walked in silence through the empty corridors, their footsteps echoing against marble floors. Inside the study, Dominic poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to the doctor, who drained it in a single swallow. "Tell me everything, doctor." Chen set down his glass and opened his medical bag, pulling out a notepad covered in handwritten observations. Grade 3 malnutrition. She weighs what a healthy 4-year-old should weigh. Her body has begun consuming its own muscle tissue to survive. Severe dehydration despite the snow outside, which tells me she wasn't even eating snow to stay hydrated. Either she didn't know she could, or she was too weak to try. He flipped a page. Mild respiratory infection in both lungs. Another few days in that cold, and it would have become full pneumonia. She would have died within a week. Dominic's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I found evidence of multiple old fractures throughout her body. 2 ribs on the left side, 3 fingers, her right ankle, all healed without medical intervention, which means they healed incorrectly. She'll likely experience chronic pain as she grows, assuming she survives. She'll survive. Doctor. Chen looked up from his notes, meeting Dominic's eyes. There's more. The psychological damage may be worse than the physical. She exhibits selective mutism, likely trauma-induced. She hasn't spoken a word since I arrived. And hypervigilance. Her eyes track every movement in the room, every sound. She's constantly assessing threats, even when there are none. He closed the notepad. Dominic, this child has been systematically abused over an extended period. 2 years at minimum, possibly longer. She needs to be hospitalized. She needs specialists, psychiatrists, a full medical team. No hospital. She could die without proper. If she goes to a hospital, they'll report her. They'll send her back into the system that did this to her. That is not an option. Dr. Chen studied the man before him. In 20 years, he had never seen emotion on Dominic Vance's face. Tonight, something flickered behind those cold eyes. Something dangerous. Then she stays here, the doctor said finally. Minimum 2 weeks. I'll set up an IV for fluids and nutrition, antibiotics for the infection, pain management for the old injuries. But Dominic, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Medicine can only do so much. What that child needs most is someone she can trust, someone who will be there consistently, patiently, without expectation, someone who can teach her that not every adult wants to hurt her. Dominic walked to the study window and looked out at the snow still falling in the darkness. In the reflection, he could see the door to the guest bedroom down the hall. Through the crack beneath it, light spilled onto the floor. She was still awake, still sitting in the darkness, waiting for the next blow to fall. He thought of Elena, who had known how to love without condition. He thought of Sophia, who had trusted him completely. Both gone. He didn't know how to love. He had never learned. His father had taught him violence, and violence was all he understood. But looking at that sliver of light beneath the door, Dominic Vance realized something that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. He wanted to try. 5 a.m. The mansion held its breath. Dr. Chen had left an hour ago, promising to return at noon with IV supplies and medications. Eleanor had finally retired to her quarters after Dominic insisted. Marcus stood guard at the front entrance, a shadow among shadows, and Dominic sat alone in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk before him. Sleep had abandoned him 4 years ago. Every night followed the same pattern. He would sit in this chair, stare at the darkness, and wait for dawn to release him from the prison of his thoughts. Sometimes he drank. Sometimes he simply existed, suspended between memories he couldn't escape and a future he didn't want. Tonight felt different. The air itself seemed charged with something he couldn't name. Then he heard it. Not crying. Children cried when they were scared or hurt. This sound was something else entirely. A rapid, shallow breathing. Desperate gasps that seemed to claw at the silence. The sound of someone drowning on dry land. Dominic was on his feet before he realized his legs carried him down the hallway toward the guest bedroom, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. The door stood slightly ajar. He pushed it open. Lily wasn't in the bed. He found her in the corner of the room, wedged between the dresser and the wall. Her small body was curled into the tightest ball possible, knees drawn up, arms wrapped over her head. She was shaking violently, her entire frame trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. Her eyes were open, wide open, but they saw nothing in this room. She was somewhere else, trapped in a memory, reliving something that made the present disappear entirely. Dominic approached slowly, carefully. He had seen this before in soldiers, in men who had witnessed too much combat. They called it shell shock, or PTSD, or a dozen other clinical names. But watching it happen to a 7-year-old girl made all those terms feel hollow. He knelt down a few feet away from her, keeping his distance. His hands hung at his sides, visible and empty. What was he supposed to do? Elena would have known. Elena had possessed an infinite well of gentleness, a natural instinct for comfort that Dominic had always admired but never understood. She would have known exactly what to say, what to do, how to reach this broken child. But Elena was dead, and Dominic had never comforted anyone in his life. So he did the only thing he could think of. He sat down on the cold floor beside her, not touching, not reaching, just present. "No one is going to hurt you here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No one, not ever." The words felt inadequate, clumsy, like trying to stop a flood with a single stone. But something shifted. Lily's breathing began to slow. The violent trembling gradually subsided to occasional shudders. Her arms lowered, inch by inch, until her face emerged from behind them. She looked at him. Not through him, like before. Not past him, like she had in the car. She looked directly at him, her eyes focusing on his face with an intensity that made his chest tighten. It was the gaze of a wild animal assessing a potential predator, calculating, measuring, deciding whether this creature before her meant safety or danger. Dominic held perfectly still. He barely breathed. They sat like that as minutes stretched into hours. Neither spoke, neither moved. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, the first gray light of dawn began to creep across the horizon. When the first ray of sunlight pierced through the curtains, casting a thin golden line across the floor, Lily did something unexpected. She moved, just 1 inch, a tiny shift of her body, sliding almost imperceptibly closer to where Dominic sat. 1 inch. It was nothing. It was everything. It was the first fragile thread of trust, offered by a child who had every reason to trust no one. And Dominic Vance, who had destroyed countless lives without hesitation, found himself terrified of breaking it. By 9 in the morning, Dominic had made 3 phone calls. The first was to Victor Reyes, his head of intelligence, a former NSA analyst who had grown disillusioned with government work and found more lucrative employment in the private sector. Victor commanded a team of hackers capable of penetrating any database, any system, any secret. The second call went to Patricia Walsh, a private investigator who specialized in cases that required discretion. She had contacts in every government agency, every courthouse, every police department in Illinois. The third call was to a man known only as Ghost, who had no official existence and could unearth information that didn't officially exist either. "I want everything," Dominic told each of them. "Every record, every document, every person who ever touched this child's life. You have 6 hours." By 3 in the afternoon, the reports began arriving. Dominic spread the documents across his desk in the study, reading each page with the focused intensity he usually reserved for business negotiations worth millions. But no deal had ever mattered to him like this. The story they told was worse than he had imagined. Crystal Morgan, born in rural Indiana, runaway at 15, heroin addiction by 17. Lily's father was listed as unknown, likely one of dozens of men Crystal had encountered during her years on the streets. When Lily was 5 years old, Crystal had sold her own daughter to a human trafficking ring operated by Ricardo Mendez for $3,000. $3,000, the price of a child's life. Dominic turned the page. The Mendez operation had moved children across the border for 2 years before the FBI finally caught up with them. Lily had been recovered 3 months ago during the raid, one of 14 children found in a warehouse outside Chicago. Mendez was currently awaiting trial in federal custody, but the FBI's involvement ended with the arrests. The children were handed over to state custody, processed through the system like paperwork rather than human beings. Lily had been placed with 3 foster families in 3 months. The first family, the Hendersons, returned her after 2 weeks, citing behavioral problems. The second family, the Carters, kept her for a month before requesting a transfer due to incompatibility. Both families had received glowing reports from social workers who had apparently never looked closely at the child in their care. The third family was the Petersons. Gary Peterson, 43, Karen Peterson, 39. They had fostered 11 children over the past 6 years, receiving $1,200 per month for each child from the state. Their home had been inspected regularly. Their records were spotless. They had abandoned Lily at a gas station in the middle of January and reported her as a runaway. Dominic read the final line of the report. Current status of Lily Morgan. Missing. Active search in progress. His hand tightened around the whiskey glass he had been holding. The crystal cracked, then shattered. Amber liquid and blood dripped onto the documents below, but Dominic didn't notice. He stared at the photograph of the Petersons attached to their file, a smiling couple standing in front of a modest suburban home, the picture of American normalcy. Killing them would be easy. He could have them dead within 24 hours, their bodies disposed of in places they would never be found. But that was too merciful. These people had profited from children's suffering for years. They had taken money meant to care for vulnerable kids and used it for themselves while treating those children like garbage to be discarded. Death was too quick for them. Dominic wanted them to suffer. Slowly, completely. He wanted to dismantle their lives piece by piece, until they had nothing left. He pressed the intercom on his desk. "Marcus, my study, now." His right hand appeared within minutes. "The Petersons," Dominic said, sliding the photograph across the desk. "I want them destroyed. Not killed. Destroyed. Every aspect of their lives. Their jobs, their finances, their reputation, their freedom. Take everything from them." Marcus studied the photo. "Understood. Timeline? Begin immediately, but make it slow. Make them feel every loss." Marcus nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Boss. Social services knows Lily is missing. They've got people looking for her. It's only a matter of time before someone connects the dots." Dominic leaned back in his chair, his expression carved from ice. "Let them look. Let them come. When they arrive at my door, I'll be ready." 3 days passed in the Vance mansion, each one bringing tiny changes that only careful eyes could detect. Lily still didn't speak. Her voice remained locked somewhere deep inside her, trapped behind walls built from years of learning that silence meant survival. But her body began to thaw in ways her words could not. On the second morning, Eleanor found her sitting by the window in her bedroom, her small hand pressed against the cold glass. She was watching the snow fall, her eyes tracking each flake as it drifted down from the gray sky. It was the first time she had shown interest in anything beyond her immediate survival. Later that day, Eleanor brought her a new blanket, soft cashmere in a pale blue color. When she draped it over Lily's shoulders, the girl's fingers moved hesitantly to touch the fabric. She rubbed it between her thumb and forefinger, her expression shifting into something that might have been wonder, as if she had never felt anything soft before. As if gentleness itself was foreign to her. The IV drip doctor, Chen, had installed delivered nutrients directly into her bloodstream, but Eleanor insisted on offering real food as well. 3 meals a day appeared on the bedside table: soup, bread, fruit cut into small pieces. Lily ate a few bites of each, never more than a child half her age might consume, but she ate. Progress. Painfully slow, heartbreakingly small, but progress nonetheless. Eleanor took it upon herself to teach Lily the things most children learned as toddlers: how to turn a light switch on and off, how to adjust the water temperature in the sink, how to use the remote control for the television, though Lily showed no interest in watching anything. On the third afternoon, Eleanor discovered something that made her excuse herself to cry alone in the hallway. Lily didn't know how to use a toilet, not because she was too young or too slow, because wherever she had been kept, she hadn't been allowed to use one. She had been confined, imprisoned, denied even the most basic human dignities. Eleanor cleaned her up gently, explained everything patiently, and never let her own horror show on her face. Dominic watched all of this from a distance. He didn't know how to help. Every interaction he had ever mastered involved power, control, or violence. He could negotiate with crime lords and interrogate traitors without breaking a sweat. But approaching a traumatized 7-year-old girl was beyond any skill he possessed. So he observed. He waited. He let Eleanor do the work that came naturally to her while he lingered in doorways and hallways, a shadow watching over a ghost. On the afternoon of the third day, something changed. Dominic was sitting in his study, reading a financial report that failed to hold his attention. The door stood open, as it always did now. He had started leaving doors open throughout the house, some instinct telling him that closed doors might feel like cages to a child who had been imprisoned. A flicker of movement caught his peripheral vision. He looked up. Lily stood in the doorway. She wasn't hiding this time, wasn't peering around the corner like a frightened mouse. She simply stood there, her small frame silhouetted against the hallway light, looking directly at him. Dominic set down his papers slowly. He didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't make any gesture that might be interpreted as expectation or demand. He simply waited. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. Lily remained motionless, her ancient eyes studying him with that same calculating intensity he had seen the night of her nightmare. 10 minutes. Then, without warning, she moved. She crossed the threshold into his study, her bare feet silent on the thick carpet. She walked to the corner farthest from his desk, the corner nearest the door where escape remained possible, and she sat down. That was all. She just sat there, her back against the wall, her knees drawn up slightly, watching him. Dominic understood. She wasn't seeking comfort or conversation. She was testing, choosing to be near him instead of hiding alone in her room, seeing if his presence remained safe when she initiated contact. He picked up his book from the side table. He began to read, or pretended to. Every few minutes, his eyes flicked toward the corner where the silent girl sat watching him. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. On the 5th morning, Eleanor woke earlier than usual. Something had pulled her from sleep, an instinct honed from decades of caring for this household. She wrapped herself in a robe and made her way downstairs, her slippers whispering against the marble floors. The kitchen light was already on. Eleanor stopped in the doorway, her breath catching in her throat. Lily stood at the breakfast table, her small figure barely tall enough to reach its surface. She was holding a plate in both hands, her thin arms trembling with the effort. One by one, she was placing dishes around the table, a plate here, a bowl there, spoons arranged in a crooked line beside each setting. Everything was wrong. The plates sat at odd angles. The bowls were upside down, the spoons lay on the wrong side, handles pointing in different directions. But the intent was unmistakable. She was trying to set the table. Eleanor's heart fractured into 1,000 pieces as understanding flooded through her. This child had learned that she had to earn her keep. Somewhere in those terrible foster homes, someone had taught her that she was only allowed to stay if she worked, that she had to prove her usefulness or be discarded like trash. Even now, even here in safety, she was trying to make herself valuable enough to keep. Eleanor approached slowly, her footsteps deliberately audible so as not to startle the girl. She lowered herself into a chair beside Lily, bringing their eyes to the same level. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle as morning light. "You don't have to work here. You don't have to earn anything. You just have to be you. That's enough. That's more than enough." Lily's hands stilled on the plate she was holding. Her eyes flickered to Eleanor's face, searching for the lie, waiting for the trick. But Eleanor's expression held nothing but warmth. The girl set down the plate. Her hands dropped to her sides. She didn't move away, didn't retreat. Another small victory. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, and Dominic appeared in the kitchen doorway. He took in the scene with a single glance, his sharp mind piecing together what had happened. And then another memory ambushed him. Sophia, at 2 years old, insisting on helping Elena set the table for breakfast, her chubby hands grabbing forks and placing them wherever she pleased. The glass of milk she knocked over, sending white liquid streaming across the wood surface. Elena's laughter, bright and free. His own smile, unfamiliar muscles that he had almost forgotten how to use. The three of them, happy. The three of them, alive. Dominic blinked the memory away and walked to the table. Without a word, he pulled out a chair and sat down. Eleanor rose to prepare breakfast, moving quietly around the kitchen. Lily remained standing, uncertain, watching. Dominic gestured to the chair beside him. Not a command, an invitation. She hesitated for an eternity of heartbeats. Then she climbed into the chair, her feet dangling far above the floor. Eleanor served eggs, toast, fruit, and orange juice. They ate in silence, no conversation, no forced cheerfulness, just the quiet sounds of forks against plates, glasses set down on wood, the ordinary music of a shared meal. When Dominic was nearly finished, something touched his arm. He looked down. Lily's hand hovered over his plate. In her trembling fingers, she held a piece of bread from her own portion. She set it carefully on the edge of his plate, then snatched her hand back like she expected to be struck for her boldness. Her eyes dropped to the table, shoulders hunched, body braced for punishment. But Dominic didn't move. He stared at the small piece of bread. Such a simple thing, such an insignificant offering, except it wasn't insignificant at all. This child, who had been starved and beaten and abandoned, was giving away food. Her food, the most precious thing she possessed. She was sharing with him because she didn't have words to say thank you. She was sharing because this was the only language of gratitude she knew. Dominic's vision blurred. For the first time in 4 years, since the day he buried his wife and daughter in matching caskets, moisture gathered in the eyes of the man they called the Shadow. He picked up the bread and ate it slowly, and in the corner of his vision, he saw Lily's shoulders relax. Just slightly. On the 7th day, the outside world came knocking. The black sedan appeared on the security monitors at exactly 10 in the morning, pulling up to the iron gates of the Vance estate. 2 police cruisers followed close behind, their lights dark but their presence unmistakable. Marcus alerted Dominic immediately. 3 vehicles at the gate. 1 civilian, 2 police, a woman in the sedan. Looks official. Social services, most likely. Dominic set down his coffee cup with deliberate calm. He had been expecting this. Preparing for it. Let them in. Escort them to the main living room. I'll be down in 5 minutes. He straightened his tie, buttoned his jacket, and descended the grand staircase with the measured pace of a man who owned the world and knew it. Margaret Cole stood in the center of his living room, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her face carved with the lines of someone who had seen too much bureaucratic tragedy. 55 years in the system had taught her to recognize power, and the man walking toward her radiated it like heat from a furnace. 2 uniformed officers flanked her, their hands resting nervously near their holsters. Marcus positioned himself behind Dominic's right shoulder, his massive frame a silent warning. "Mr. Vance," Margaret began, her voice professionally steady despite the tension crackling through the room. "I'm Margaret Cole, senior caseworker with the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. We've received information that you may be harboring a minor child who is currently a ward of the state, a girl named Lily Morgan." Dominic didn't blink. "Miss Lily is currently receiving medical care in my home. She requires this care because she was abandoned at an abandoned gas station in sub-zero temperatures by the foster family that your department placed her with." Margaret's composure flickered. "Mr. Vance, I understand there may have been abandoned." Dominic cut her off, his voice sharp as a blade. "Left to freeze to death, by people your department vetted and approved." He picked up a manila folder from the side table and handed it to her. "This is the medical report prepared by Dr. Nathan Chen, a licensed physician. Inside you will find documentation of grade 3 malnutrition, severe dehydration, multiple untreated bone fractures, evidence of systematic physical abuse, and psychological trauma consistent with prolonged captivity. Photographs are included." Margaret opened the folder. The color drained from her face as she flipped through the pages. The photographs made one of the officers look away. "I want to know," Dominic continued, his tone ice cold, "how a child passed through 3 foster families under your supervision, each one abusing her worse than the last, and not a single one of your social workers noticed." Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she closed the folder. "Mr. Vance, regardless of what may have happened, this child is legally a ward of the state. She needs to be returned to a proper facility where she can. She needs to stay exactly where she is." Dominic's voice dropped to something more dangerous than a shout. "She is in the middle of critical medical treatment. Moving her now would cause additional trauma to an already severely traumatized child. You have no legal right to keep her. You're not a relative, not a licensed foster parent. My attorney filed an emergency petition for temporary guardianship at 8 this morning. Judge Harrison is reviewing the case as we speak. I expect approval by this afternoon." Margaret stared at him. She knew that name. Everyone in Cook County knew that name. Judge Harrison was one of the most powerful figures in the family court system, and if Dominic Vance had him on speed dial, this situation was far beyond her authority to resolve. "I see," she said finally. "Then we'll await the court's decision." She turned to leave, the officers falling in step behind her. But at the doorway, she paused. Her gaze had drifted upward, toward the grand staircase. Lily stood on the landing, half hidden behind Eleanor's protective frame. Her small face was pale, her eyes fixed on the strangers below. But the expression in those eyes wasn't fear. It was vigilance, recognition, the look of a child who understood exactly what these people represented. They were the ones who could take her away. Margaret met that gaze for a long moment, then she turned and walked out into the winter morning, carrying questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. 2 weeks had passed since the night at the gas station. The emergency guardianship had been approved, just as Dominic predicted. Judge Harrison signed the papers without hesitation, granting temporary custody until a full hearing could be scheduled. Margaret Cole and her department had retreated, at least for now, and Lily had begun to settle into something resembling a routine. Mornings meant breakfast with Dominic. She still ate small portions, still watched everyone carefully before touching her food, but she no longer flinched when Eleanor placed a plate in front of her. Afternoons found her in Dominic's study, curled in her corner with the art supplies Eleanor had purchased. Crayons, colored pencils, paper. She drew quietly while Dominic worked, filling pages with images she never showed anyone. Evenings belonged to Eleanor, who had started reading aloud to Lily before bed. Classic children's stories that Lily had never heard. Tales of adventure and magic and happy endings that seemed foreign to a child raised on pain. She still didn't speak, but her face had begun to remember expressions. A small furrow between her brows when something confused her. A slight widening of her eyes when snow fell outside the window. The ghost of displeasure when Eleanor served vegetables she didn't like. These tiny shifts meant everything. On this particular night, Dominic was conducting a video conference in his study. The laptop screen showed 6 faces, his lieutenants scattered across Chicago's underworld empire. A shipment had been intercepted. Territory disputes were escalating. Money was being lost. Lily sat in her usual corner, coloring with quiet concentration. The meeting grew heated. "I don't care about his excuses," Dominic growled, his voice rising with controlled fury. He had one job, one responsibility. If he can't handle, a sound interrupted him. The clatter of crayons hitting hardwood floor. Dominic's head snapped toward the corner. Lily had dropped everything. Her small body was curled into a tight ball, knees drawn up, arms wrapped over her head. The defensive position he had seen that first night. The posture of a child bracing for impact. His raised voice. She had heard his raised voice, and her body had reacted before her mind could process that the anger wasn't directed at her. "Meeting's over," Dominic said flatly. 6 confused faces stared at him from the screen. "But sir, we haven't." He closed the laptop without another word. The room fell silent except for the soft, rapid breathing coming from the corner. Dominic rose slowly from his chair. He walked toward Lily with measured steps, each footfall deliberately audible so she would know exactly where he was. 3 feet away, he stopped and lowered himself to the floor, sitting with his back against the wall just as he had done that first night. "Lily." His voice came out softer than he knew it could. "I'm sorry. I wasn't angry at you. I was talking to other people about work things. Boring adult problems that have nothing to do with you." She didn't move. "I promise you something. I will never raise my voice at you. Never. No matter what happens, no matter what you do, I will never yell at you." Slowly, like a flower opening after a long winter, Lily's arms lowered. Her face emerged from behind them, tear tracks glistening on her cheeks. She looked at him with those ancient eyes, and then she spoke. "Really?" 1 word, 2 syllables. Her voice was rough, scratchy, hoarse from weeks of disuse. It cracked on the 2nd syllable, barely louder than a whisper, but it was real. She had spoken. For the first time since he found her in that frozen wasteland, she had used her voice. Dominic felt the word pierce through every wall he had built around his heart. "Really," he answered, and his own voice trembled, just slightly, in a way that Marcus, watching silently from the hallway, had never witnessed in 12 years of service. Lily didn't say anything else that night, but she didn't need to. The wall she had built around herself, the impenetrable fortress of silence, had finally shown its first crack, and Dominic understood that this small broken word was worth more than any empire he had ever built. The call came at 11 that night. A shipment worth $2 million had been intercepted on the south side. 3 of Dominic's men were dead, and the informant who had leaked the route was currently tied to a chair in a warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Business didn't wait for personal transformations. Dominic stood in the foyer, pulling on his black coat, when he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hesitation. He glanced toward the staircase, toward the 2nd floor where Lily was sleeping. Eleanor had read her 3 stories tonight, and for the first time, the girl had drifted off without thrashing through nightmares. Peace. Fragile, hard-won peace. And he was about to walk into violence. "Boss." Marcus stood by the door, keys in hand. "We need to move." Dominic nodded once and stepped into the cold night air. The warehouse smelled of rust, motor oil, and fear. Tony Marchetti sat bound to a metal chair in the center of the concrete floor, his face already swollen from the preliminary work Dominic's men had done before his arrival. Blood dripped from a split lip onto his expensive shirt, ruined now beyond repair. Dominic removed his coat and handed it to Marcus. He rolled up his sleeves with mechanical precision, exposing forearms corded with muscle. The single hanging light bulb cast harsh shadows across his face, erasing any trace of the man who had knelt beside a frightened child just hours ago. "Tony." His voice echoed in the empty space. "You've been with me for 6 years. I trusted you." Marchetti's eyes darted around the room, searching for salvation that wouldn't come. "Mr. Vance, please, I can explain. You gave the Ricci family our shipping route. 3 of my men are dead because of information you sold. They threatened my family. I had no choice." Dominic picked up a pair of pliers from the table of tools beside him. "There are always choices, Tony. You made yours." What followed was work. Ugly, necessary work that Dominic had performed countless times before. The extraction of information, the punishment for betrayal, the message that would be sent to anyone else who considered disloyalty. He had done this 100 times, 1,000. But tonight, something was different. Midway through, As Marchetti screamed and begged, Dominic looked into the man's eyes, wild with terror, pleading, desperate, and he saw Lily. He saw her huddled in the corner of his study, arms over her head, bracing for pain that had become the only certainty in her young life. He saw the same fear. Dominic's hand stopped moving. For a long moment, he stood frozen, pliers suspended in the air, caught between two worlds that could never coexist. Then he set down the tool. "Finish it," he said to his men. "Quick and clean. No more games." Marcus's eyes flickered with surprise, but he said nothing. They drove home in silence as the first gray light of dawn crept across the horizon. Dominic sat in the back seat, staring at his hands. He had scrubbed them 3 times before leaving the warehouse. The blood was gone, but he could still feel it there, soaked into skin that would never truly be clean. 3:15 in the morning. The mansion was quiet as he climbed the stairs. He paused outside Lily's door, which stood slightly ajar. She was asleep, truly asleep, not just unconscious from exhaustion. Her face was relaxed, her breathing steady and even. One small hand clutched the edge of her blanket. The other rested on the teddy bear Eleanor had given her, fingers tangled in its soft fur. She looked like what she was supposed to be. A child, innocent, unburdened. Dominic leaned against the doorframe, watching her in the dim light. He was a monster. He had built an empire on blood and fear, and tonight he had added more sins to a ledger that could never be balanced. The same hands that had wielded those pliers were the hands that had offered Lily bread at breakfast. How could both things be true? How could he nurture this broken child while remaining the creature the underworld feared? He didn't have answers, but as he watched Lily sleep peacefully for the first time since he'd found her, Dominic understood one thing with absolute clarity. He couldn't give up either world. The darkness was who he was, and this child, this tiny spark of light, was who he wanted to be. Both were him, both would remain, and somehow, he would have to find a way to live in the space between. 3 weeks after the night at the warehouse, Marcus delivered the final report. Dominic read it in his study, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the pages. Each paragraph brought a grim satisfaction that settled in his chest like cold iron. The Peterson file was complete. Gary Peterson, 43, former middle manager at a logistics company, had been terminated from his position 8 days ago. An anonymous email had arrived in his supervisor's inbox containing detailed records of his internet search history. The content was disturbing enough to warrant immediate dismissal and a quiet suggestion that he never seek employment in the industry again. Karen Peterson, 39, was currently under investigation by the Illinois State Attorney's Office. Financial records had mysteriously surfaced, showing systematic fraud over 6 years of foster care, $1,200 per month per child, meant for food, clothing, education. The money had instead funded vacations, home improvements, and a lifestyle the Petersons could never have afforded on legitimate income. Their house, the modest suburban home where they had posed for that smiling photograph, was now property of First National Bank. A routine audit had uncovered irregularities in their mortgage documents, irregularities that Dominic's people had quietly planted months ago, waiting for the right moment. And as of yesterday morning, both Gary and Karen Peterson had been permanently barred from participating in any foster care program in the state of Illinois. Their names would be flagged in every database, every system, every background check. They would never touch another child again. Dominic set down the report and reached for his whiskey. This wasn't murder. It wasn't violence in the traditional sense. But it was destruction, complete and systematic, exactly as he had promised. Yet even as satisfaction hummed through his veins, he understood something important. None of this would heal Lily. No amount of revenge could undo what had been done to her. The scars on her body would remain. The fractures in her mind would take years to mend, if they ever fully healed at all. Destroying the Petersons was justice, perhaps, but it wasn't medicine. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to find Lily standing in the doorway, a piece of paper clutched in both hands. She had started doing this more often, appearing silently when she wanted something, waiting to be acknowledged rather than speaking. "Come in," Dominic said. She crossed the room slowly and stopped beside his desk. For a moment, she simply stood there, staring at the paper in her hands. Then she held it out to him. Dominic took it carefully, turning it right side up. It was a drawing, crude, as children's drawings often were, but unmistakable in its darkness. A house rendered in heavy black crayon, every line pressed hard into the paper. The windows were colored deep red, like wounds in the facade. No sun, no grass, no flowers, just the black house bleeding against white emptiness. He looked at Lily. Her eyes met his, and she spoke. Only her second time using her voice since that night in his study. Old place. 2 words, rough and quiet. But they carried the weight of everything she couldn't yet articulate. This was her story, told the only way she knew how. Dominic studied the drawing again. The black walls, the red windows, the oppressive darkness that seemed to seep from every crayon stroke. This was what her life had looked like before him. He set the paper down on his desk, treating it with the gravity it deserved. "You will never go back there," he said. His voice was steady, absolute. Not a promise but a fact, as certain as gravity. Never. Do you understand? Lily looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes, still too old for her face, searched his expression for deception, for false hope, for the betrayal she had learned to expect from every adult. She found none, and for the first time since the night he discovered her in that frozen wasteland, something shifted in her gaze. The constant vigilance softened, just slightly, the tension in her small shoulders eased by a fraction. She nodded once. Then she turned and walked out of the study, leaving the black house behind on his desk. Dominic looked at the drawing for a long time after she left. Then he opened his desk drawer and placed it carefully inside, where it would stay until the day Lily was ready to burn it herself. 2 months in the Vance mansion, and Lily had begun to change. The most visible transformation was physical. 4 pounds gained, according to Dr. Chen's weekly examinations. Her cheeks, once hollow and pale as paper, now carried the faintest hint of color. The sharp angles of her bones had softened slightly beneath skin that no longer looked stretched to breaking. She ate real meals now. Not full portions. Not yet, but enough to sustain growth rather than mere survival. But the deeper changes showed in smaller ways. She spoke. Not often, not in long sentences, but she used her voice. Short questions, mostly, testing the boundaries of this new world. Okay? When she wanted permission to touch something. Here? When she wasn't sure if she was allowed in a room. This? When Eleanor showed her something unfamiliar. Each word was a victory. Each question was proof that she was beginning to believe her voice mattered. She had also started following Dominic. Not obviously, not constantly, but with the quiet persistence of a shadow. When he walked from his study to the kitchen, she would appear moments later. When he sat in the living room to read, she would materialize in a nearby corner. When he moved through the hallways, soft footsteps echoed behind him. Eleanor noticed first. "She's attached to you," the older woman observed one morning, like a duckling who's imprinted on the first safe thing it found. Dominic didn't respond, but he understood. He was changing too. The empire still ran. The business still demanded attention, but he delegated more now. Marcus handled matters that once required personal oversight. Meetings ended earlier. Trips outside the city became rare. He wanted to be home. He stopped drinking whiskey after 9 in the evening. The first time Lily had a nightmare when he was foggy from alcohol. He had been too slow to reach her, too clumsy in his comfort. He never made that mistake again. And then there was the room. Sophia's room had remained sealed for 4 years. A tomb of pink walls and stuffed animals and tiny dresses that would never be worn. Dominic hadn't crossed its threshold since the week after the funeral, when he had stood in the center of that perfect nursery and felt his heart finish dying. But one afternoon, while Lily napped and Eleanor managed the household, he found himself standing outside that door. His hand trembled as he turned the knob. Everything was exactly as Elena had left it. The crib with its yellow blanket, the rocking chair by the window, the shelf lined with stuffed animals, waiting for a child who would never play with them. Dominic walked to the shelf. His fingers brushed across soft fur and button eyes until they stopped on a particular bear. Brown, small, wearing a red ribbon around its neck. Elena had bought it the day they learned she was pregnant. He picked it up and carried it out of the room, closing the door gently behind him. That night, he placed the bear on Lily's pillow. She found it when Eleanor tucked her in, and her eyes widened with something that might have been wonder. She didn't ask where it came from. She simply clutched it against her chest and fell asleep holding it tight. Marcus noticed the changes in his boss, too. The way Dominic's face would soften, almost imperceptibly, when Lily entered a room. The way his voice dropped to gentler registers when he spoke to her. The way something that resembled a smile would flicker across his features, brief as lightning but unmistakable. Expressions Marcus had assumed were extinct. On a quiet evening in the 2nd month, Dominic sat in the living room reviewing financial reports. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Eleanor had retired early. Marcus stood guard at the entrance, invisible but present. Lily appeared in the doorway, barefoot in her pajamas, the brown bear tucked under one arm. Dominic looked up, expecting her to settle in her usual corner. Instead, she walked directly to the sofa. Without asking permission, without hesitation, she climbed up onto the cushion beside him. She settled against his side, her small body pressing into his arm, her head coming to rest against his shoulder. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Dominic held perfectly still for a moment, afraid that any movement might shatter this fragile miracle. Then, slowly, his free hand lifted from the papers. It hovered uncertainly in the air before coming to rest on her head. His fingers moved through her hair, awkward and unpracticed, the touch of a man who had forgotten how to be gentle. Lily's eyes drifted closed. The fire crackled. The papers lay forgotten. The world outside continued its violent turning. But in this room, in this moment, a broken man and a broken child sat together in silence, and it was the most ordinary, most extraordinary moment either of them had experienced in years. The photograph arrived on a Tuesday morning. Marcus brought it directly to Dominic's study, his face carved from stone in a way that signaled serious trouble. He placed the manila envelope on the desk without a word. Dominic opened it. Inside was a single photograph, printed on glossy paper, a long-distance shot of the Vance estate, taken from somewhere beyond the perimeter walls. The image was clear enough to show individual windows, individual rooms. One window had been circled in red marker, Lily's bedroom. Beneath the photograph, a handwritten note in elegant script. Such a pretty little thing. Would be a shame if something happened. No signature, none needed. The rumors had been circulating for weeks. Whispers in the underworld, passed from ear to ear through the network of criminals, informants, and opportunists who populated Chicago's shadow economy. The shadow has gone soft. Dominic Vance has a weakness. A child. Imagine that. Carmine Ricci controlled the East Side territories, and he had been waiting years for an opportunity to expand. He was old school, brutal, convinced that mercy was for fools and sentimentality was a death sentence. When he heard about the girl, he must have thought Christmas had come early. Dominic stared at the photograph for a long moment. Something woke inside him. Not panic, not fear, something far more dangerous. Rage, pure, volcanic fury of the kind he hadn't felt since the night he stood over his wife's grave and swore to destroy everyone responsible for her death. His hand didn't tremble as he set the photograph down. His voice didn't waver as he spoke. Get me Victor, Patricia, everyone. My study, 1 hour. Marcus nodded. And Ricci? Dominic's eyes lifted to meet his right hand's gaze. What Marcus saw there made even the hardened former SEAL take an involuntary step back. Ricci wants to test whether I've gone soft. He'll learn the same lesson Castellano learned 4 years ago. Marcus understood perfectly. The Castellano family had murdered Elena and Sofia. Within 6 months, every single member of that organization had been eliminated. Not just the leaders, everyone. The name Castellano had been erased from Chicago's criminal landscape so thoroughly that newcomers didn't even know it had existed. That was what happened when you touched Dominic Vance's family. Within 48 hours, the estate transformed into a fortress. Security tripled. Armed guards patrolled the grounds in overlapping shifts. Motion sensors, cameras, and silent alarms covered every inch of the perimeter. 2 bodyguards were assigned specifically to Lily, hand-selected by Dominic himself, trained to be gentle with children, instructed to remain invisible unless danger appeared. Lily was frightened of them at first. 2 large men who appeared whenever she left her room, who followed her to breakfast, who stood outside doors wherever she went. She pressed closer to Eleanor, eyes wide with confusion and returning fear. But these men had been chosen carefully. They smiled softly when she looked at them. They kept their distance. They never raised their voices or made sudden movements. By the 2nd day, she had accepted their presence. By the 3rd, she almost seemed comforted by it. Dominic called an emergency meeting of his allies. 6 crime lords gathered in his study, each one commanding their own territory, their own soldiers, their own piece of Chicago's underworld. They listened as Dominic explained the situation in clipped, precise sentences. When he finished, there was no debate. Ricci had crossed a line. Threatening a child, any child, violated codes that even criminals honored, and threatening Dominic Vance's child was suicide. The alliance was unanimous. Ricci would face consequences. But that was business for tomorrow. Tonight, after the meetings ended and the allies departed, Dominic climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. He dismissed the guards with a gesture and entered Lily's room alone. She was asleep, curled around the brown teddy bear, her breathing slow and peaceful. The nightmares had become less frequent, though they still visited sometimes. Dominic lowered himself into the chair beside her bed, the same chair Eleanor used when reading bedtime stories. He watched the rise and fall of Lily's small chest, counted each breath as proof that she was safe, alive, present. His hand reached out, hovering above her hair without quite touching. "No one will hurt you," he whispered into the darkness. "No one will ever touch you. I swear it on everything I am, everything I have." Outside, snow began to fall, and Dominic Vance sat vigil over his daughter, a shadow standing guard against the night. Carmine Ricci was dealt with by the end of the second month. Dominic didn't kill him. Death would have been too quick, too merciful for a man who had threatened a child. Instead, Ricci was found 3 days after his disappearance, dumped on the steps of his own headquarters, alive but permanently altered, both kneecaps shattered, spine damaged in 2 places. He would never walk again, never stand, never command respect from anyone. A message, written in flesh and bone, to anyone else who might consider touching what belonged to Dominic Vance. Peace returned to the estate. The extra guards remained, but their presence became routine rather than urgent. The tension that had gripped the household slowly released its hold. Life settled back into its new normal. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, Eleanor sat with Lily in the sunroom, teaching her to draw. Crayons and colored pencils spread across the table, paper scattered everywhere, art supplies that had become Lily's favorite way to communicate what words still couldn't express. "What would you like to draw today?" Eleanor asked. Lily considered the question seriously, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then she selected a white crayon and began to work. Eleanor watched as the image took shape. A house emerged first, not the black house with bleeding windows that still lived in Dominic's desk drawer. This house was different. White walls, yellow windows glowing with warmth, a door standing open in welcome. Then came the figures. 3 people standing in front of the house, rendered in the simple strokes of a child's hand. One was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing dark colors. One was shorter, rounder, with gray hair drawn in careful loops. And one was small, a little girl with brown hair, standing between the other 2. Eleanor's heart began to beat faster as Lily reached for a pencil. Above the tall figure, the girl wrote something. Her letters were shaky, uncertain, formed with the careful attention of someone who had only recently learned them. D-A-D-D-Y. Eleanor stopped breathing. "Lily, sweetheart," she said softly. "Do you know what that word means?" Lily nodded, her eyes still fixed on the drawing. "You teached me." "Taught," Eleanor corrected automatically, then caught herself. Yes, I did." "And that's what you want to call him?" Another nod. Small, certain, Eleanor rose from the table on unsteady legs. "Wait here, dear, just for a moment." She found Dominic in his study, reviewing documents that suddenly seemed utterly unimportant. Her face must have shown something unusual, because he was on his feet immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Come with me." "Now." He followed her to the sunroom, his stride quick with concern. But when they arrived, he stopped short in the doorway. Lily sat at the table, her drawing held up in both hands. She watched him approach with an expression that mixed hope and fear in equal measure. Dominic crossed the room slowly. He knelt beside her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers, and looked at the picture she offered. The White House, the 3 figures, and above his own crayon likeness, that word, Daddy. A memory crashed over him like a wave. Sophia, at 18 months, sitting in Elena's lap, pointing at him with one chubby finger. The sounds she had been practicing for weeks, finally coming together. Da-da, da-da, Daddy. Elena crying with joy, his own face splitting into a grin so wide it hurt. Lifting his daughter above his head and spinning her in circles while she shrieked with laughter. Daddy, 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 the word that had died with them. Dominic blinked, and he was back in the sunroom. Lily was watching him with growing anxiety, her small body tensing as silence stretched between them. Not okay?" she whispered, her voice beginning to crack. Dominic reached out and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. His throat felt thick, his chest tight with emotions he had buried for 4 years. "It's okay," he said, and his voice came out rough, uneven, human in a way he had forgotten he could be. "It's more than okay." He swallowed hard. "You can call me Daddy whenever you want, for as long as you want, forever, if you choose." Lily's eyes searched his face, looking for the trap, the lie, the inevitable disappointment. She found none, and slowly, like dawn breaking over a long dark night, a smile appeared on her face. It was small, hesitant, imperfect in the way of someone who had forgotten how to smile, and was only now remembering the mechanics. But it was real, the first genuine smile she had worn since the night Dominic found her dying in the snow. Eleanor turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth to stifle the sob building in her chest, and Dominic knelt there, his hand on his daughter's shoulder, watching her smile, feeling something bloom in the wasteland of his heart, something that felt terrifyingly like hope. 3 months after the night at the gas station, Dominic Vance walked into Cook County Family Court. His empire stretched across Chicago's underworld. His name commanded fear in boardrooms and back alleys alike. 6 judges owed him favors, and half the police force looked the other way when his business required it. But none of that mattered here. Family Court operated by different rules. The guardianship hearing would proceed according to law, evidence, and the judge's assessment of Lily's best interests. Dominic's power could influence many things, but it couldn't simply override the legal process. Not if he wanted to do this right. Victoria Shaw, his attorney, was the best family lawyer in Illinois. Elegant, razor-sharp, and utterly ruthless in the courtroom. She had prepared a case so thorough that every possible objection had already been anticipated and countered. The hearing room was smaller than Dominic expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting, rows of chairs facing the judge's bench. It felt ordinary, mundane, completely unlike the setting for a decision that would determine the rest of Lily's life. Margaret Cole was already present, seated near the front. The social worker who had come to take Lily away 3 months ago now held a very different opinion. Her investigation into Lily's foster care history had revealed systematic failures so severe that she had become an advocate for keeping the girl exactly where she was. James Whitmore, the guardian ad litem appointed to represent Lily's interests, sat beside her. He had interviewed Lily 3 times, visited the Vance estate twice, and reviewed every document in her file. His report, submitted yesterday, recommended permanent placement with Dominic. Judge Maria Santos presided over the hearing. A stern woman in her 60s, known for prioritizing children's welfare above all other considerations. Dominic had never met her, had no leverage over her. This would be decided on merit alone. Victoria had just finished presenting the medical evidence when the courtroom doors opened. A man walked in, mid-30s, gaunt face, nervous eyes that darted around the room before settling on Lily with an expression of calculated warmth. "Your Honor," he announced loudly, "I'm Derek Morgan, Crystal Morgan's brother. I'm here to claim custody of my niece." The room fell silent. Victoria recovered first. "Your Honor, this individual was not included in any notification. I just found out about all this," Derek interrupted, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "No one told me my sister had a kid. Soon as I heard, I came right away. Family should be with family, right?" Judge Santos studied him with cool appraisal. "Mr. Morgan, do you have legal representation?" "Don't need any. I'm blood. That should count for something." Victoria rose smoothly from her seat. "Your Honor, if I may present evidence regarding Mr. Morgan's background." She produced a folder that Dominic's investigators had prepared weeks ago, anticipating exactly this scenario. Derek Morgan has 2 prior convictions for drug possession and 1 for petty theft. He has been aware of Lily's existence since her birth, according to hospital records that list him as emergency contact for Crystal Morgan. In 7 years, he never once attempted to contact his niece. His sudden interest coincides with his recent discovery that Lily is the beneficiary of a $30,000 trust fund established by her maternal grandparents. Derek's face reddened. "That's a lie. I never knew about any trust fund. I just want what's best for the kid. The documentation suggests otherwise." Judge Santos raised her hand, silencing both parties. She turned her attention to the small figure seated beside Dominic. "Lily, would you come here, please?" Lily's hand tightened around Dominic's fingers. She looked up at him with wide eyes, fear flickering across her face. He squeezed gently. "It's okay. I'll be right here." She rose slowly and walked toward the bench, her steps small and hesitant, but her hand remained wrapped around Dominic's until the last possible moment, releasing only when distance made it impossible to hold on. Judge Santos leaned forward, her voice softening. "Lily, do you understand why we're here today?" A tiny nod. "Can you tell me, in your own words, where you would like to live?" The courtroom held its breath. Lily stood motionless for a long moment. Her eyes moved from the judge to Derek Morgan, whom she had never seen before and who watched her with hungry intensity, then back to Dominic, who sat perfectly still, his face revealing nothing of the storm raging inside him. When she spoke, her voice was small but absolutely clear. "Daddy." Derek's face contorted. "I want to stay with Daddy." Silence swallowed the room. Even the court reporter's fingers paused above her keyboard. Judge Santos nodded slowly, making a note on the paper before her. "Thank you, Lily. You may return to your seat." And Lily walked back to Dominic, climbed into the chair beside him, and wrapped both hands around his arm as if she would never let go. 2 weeks passed between hearings. 2 weeks of additional interviews, background checks, and deliberation. 2 weeks of Dominic waiting for a decision that no amount of money or power could guarantee. 2 weeks of Lily asking quietly each morning, "Today?" And Dominic having to tell her, "Not yet." On the 14th day, the court reconvened. The hearing room felt different this time, smaller somehow, the air heavier with anticipation. Every seat was occupied. Margaret Cole sat with a folder of final recommendations. Victoria Shaw had prepared closing arguments she hoped wouldn't be necessary. Derek Morgan slouched in the back row, court-appointed attorney beside him, his face tight with barely concealed desperation. Judge Maria Santos entered at exactly 9 in the morning. The room rose and settled as she took her seat, her expression unreadable as she arranged papers before her. "This court has reviewed all evidence, testimony, and recommendations regarding the guardianship petition for the minor child, Lily Morgan." She paused, her eyes moving across the room before settling on Derek Morgan. "Regarding the counter-petition filed by Derek Morgan, this court finds the following. The petitioner has demonstrated no prior relationship with the child. Evidence indicates awareness of the child's existence for 7 years with no attempt at contact. Furthermore, the petitioner's criminal history and the timing of his claim, coinciding with discovery of the child's trust fund, suggests financial motivation rather than genuine familial concern." Derek's face reddened. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "The petition of Derek Morgan is hereby denied." "This is garbage," Derek shouted, rising from his seat. "She's my blood. You can't give her to some stranger. This whole thing is rigged. He probably paid you off like he pays everyone." 2 bailiffs moved immediately, taking his arms and pulling him toward the exit. His voice echoed through the hallway as the doors swung shut behind him, obscenities fading into the distance. Judge Santos waited for silence to return before continuing. "Regarding the petition filed by Dominic Vance for permanent legal guardianship." Lily's hand found Dominic's under the table. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. "This court has considered the child's medical progress, the recommendations of Child Protective Services, the guardian ad litem's assessment, and most importantly, the clearly expressed wishes of the child herself." The judge looked directly at Dominic. "Mr. Vance, I will be honest. When this case first came across my desk, I had reservations. Your background is not typical of prospective guardians. However, the evidence before me is overwhelming. This child has thrived in your care in ways the system failed to provide for 7 years." She lifted her gavel. "The petition is granted. Dominic Vance is hereby awarded full legal guardianship of Lily Morgan. Furthermore, the court approves the petition for legal name change. The child shall henceforth be known as Lily Vance." The gavel fell with a sound like a starting gun. Something wet landed on Dominic's hand. He looked down to find Lily crying. She had never cried before. Not when he found her freezing in that cardboard box. Not during her nightmares. Not through months of healing from trauma no child should ever experience. She had kept her tears locked away, perhaps afraid that showing vulnerability would bring more pain. But now they fell free. Victoria appeared beside them, her professional composure softened by genuine warmth. "Congratulations, Dominic. She's officially your daughter now." Dominic didn't respond to his lawyer. His attention remained fixed on the crying girl beside him. He leaned down, bringing his face close to hers. "Should we go home, sweetheart?" He paused, and then spoke words he hadn't used in 4 years. "Should we go home, my daughter?" Lily looked up at him, tears still streaming, something breaking and healing simultaneously in her expression. And then she moved, her arms wrapped around his neck, her small body pressing against his chest, holding on with fierce desperation. The first time she had initiated an embrace, the first time she had reached for comfort rather than waiting for it to be offered. Dominic froze, for 1 heartbeat, 2, then his arms rose, slowly, carefully, and closed around her. He held her the way he had once held Sophia, the way he thought he would never hold anyone again. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Marcus stood waiting. He had been there all morning, stationed by the door, ready for whatever outcome emerged. When Dominic walked out carrying Lily in his arms, the girl's face buried against his shoulder, Marcus saw something he never expected to witness. His boss was smiling, not the cold, calculating smile of business negotiations, not the grim satisfaction of victory over enemies. A real smile, warm and unguarded. Marcus turned away quickly, pressing thumb and forefinger against his eyes. Dust, he would tell anyone who asked, just dust in his eyes. 6 months after the court verdict, Lily Vance turned 8 years old. The birthday party was small, held in the mansion's garden on a warm spring afternoon. Eleanor baked a 3-layer chocolate cake. Marcus stood guard by the gate, pretending not to smile when Lily blew out her candles. And Emma Chen, daughter of the doctor who had saved Lily's life that first night, ran through the rose bushes playing tag with her new best friend. Lily had started school 3 months earlier. Private academy, carefully selected, with teachers trained in childhood trauma and a student body small enough for close supervision. The first week had been difficult. Lily clung to Eleanor at drop-off, her eyes following the car until it disappeared around the corner. But children are resilient in ways adults forget. By the 2nd month, she was raising her hand in class. By the 3rd, she was eating lunch with Emma and 2 other girls. By the 4th, she came home chattering about projects and assignments and the unfairness of multiplication tables. She still had nightmares. Not every night anymore. Once or twice a month, she would wake gasping, tears streaming, trapped in memories that would never fully release her. On those nights, Dominic would sit beside her bed until dawn, his presence a silent promise that the darkness couldn't touch her here. But the good nights outnumbered the bad now. Progress was measured in peaceful sleep and morning smiles. Lily talked constantly, to Eleanor about cooking and gardening, to Marcus about his Navy days, which he edited heavily for young ears, to her teachers, her classmates, anyone who would listen. And to Dominic, she talked about everything. Daddy had become the most natural word in her vocabulary. She used it 100 times a day, each repetition a small miracle that Dominic never stopped appreciating. She still didn't like being away from him for too long. School hours were manageable, but overnight trips remained impossible. When Dominic had to travel for business, Lily counted the hours until his return, her anxiety only soothed by video calls where she could see his face and confirm he hadn't disappeared. But she was learning, growing, becoming the child she had never been allowed to be. Dominic had changed too. The Empire still ran. The Shadow still commanded respect and fear throughout Chicago's underworld, but boundaries had been drawn that never existed before. He delegated the ugliest work now, the interrogations, the enforcement, the tasks that left blood on hands and stains on souls. Marcus and the lieutenants handled what Dominic once would have done himself. He attended parent-teacher conferences, sitting in chairs too small for his frame, listening to reports about Lily's reading level and social development. Marcus always accompanied him, standing by the classroom door like the world's most overdressed security guard. The teachers learned not to ask questions, and in the quiet evenings, Dominic had begun telling Lily about Elena and Sophia, not the tragedy, never the tragedy, but the life before it. The woman who had loved roses and burned toast and laughed like music. The little girl who had chased butterflies and demanded bedtime stories and called him daddy in exactly the way Lily did now. "Your first mommy?" Lily called Elena. "My sister in heaven?" She called Sophia. She incorporated them into her understanding of family, making space for ghosts alongside the living. Christmas Eve arrived exactly 1 year after the night at the gas station. The mansion looked different now. Lights wound around the banisters. Holly wreaths hung on every door. And in the main living room, a 12-foot Christmas tree sparkled with ornaments that Lily had helped choose. The first Christmas tree in this house since Elena died. Eleanor had prepared a feast. Marcus sat at the table in civilian clothes, looking uncomfortable without his usual tactical gear. 3 of Dominic's most trusted men joined them. Men who had watched their terrifying boss transform into something they never imagined possible. They ate and laughed, and pulled Christmas crackers like an ordinary family, because that's what they had become. After dinner, Lily tugged Dominic's sleeve. "I have a present for you, Daddy." She disappeared and returned with a rolled paper tied with red ribbon. Her eyes shone with nervous excitement as she placed it in his hands. Dominic unrolled it carefully. A drawing. The White House with golden windows had become familiar now, a symbol of safety in Lily's artistic vocabulary. But this version was different. 4 figures stood before the house. Dominic, tall and dark. Eleanor, round and silver-haired. Lily herself, small but no longer broken. And Marcus, standing slightly apart but clearly included. Above them, in a sky filled with yellow stars, 2 figures floated on clouds, angels with smiling faces and tiny wings. Dominic stared at the drawing for a long moment. "How did you know what they looked like?" he asked, his voice rough. Lily leaned against his arm. "You told me stories about them, Daddy. The mommy with dark hair who loved flowers, the little girl who laughed all the time." She pointed at the angels. "I think they're smiling because you found me. I think they're happy you're not sad anymore." The room had gone silent. Eleanor pressed a handkerchief to her eyes. Marcus studied the ceiling with intense concentration. The three soldiers suddenly found their dessert plates fascinating, and Dominic pulled his daughter close, the drawing clutched in his other hand, feeling something he had thought died 4 years ago. Joy. Pure, unexpected, terrifying joy. 1 year ago, I was darkness. I existed without purpose. I breathed without living. Every morning arrived as a burden to endure. Every night stretched into an abyss of memories I couldn't escape. My heart had stopped beating the day I buried my wife and daughter, and the man who remained was nothing more than a shadow wearing expensive suits. I had convinced myself this was enough, that survival was sufficient, that feeling nothing was better than feeling the agony that lurked beneath the surface. I was wrong. 1 year ago, on the coldest night Chicago had seen in a decade, I found a child dying in a cardboard box, a little girl with ancient eyes, frozen fingers clutching moldy bread, and a soul so shattered that silence was her only language. I thought I was saving her. I was wrong about that too. She was saving me. A Tuesday morning in the Vance mansion. Sunlight streamed through the windows, painting golden rectangles on the marble floors. The smell of pancakes drifted from the kitchen where Eleanor hummed an old hymn over the griddle. Footsteps thundered on the staircase. Lily Vance, 8 years old, came bounding down the steps with the energy of a child who had finally learned that mornings could be safe. Her hair bounced in the ponytail Eleanor had styled. Her smile stretched wide enough to light the entire room. "Daddy." Dominic looked up from his coffee, newspaper forgotten in his hands. "Good morning, sweetheart." "Daddy, can we go to the park today? Emma said there are baby ducks in the pond now, and I really want to see them. Please? Pretty please?" The man who had once commanded fear across Chicago's underworld felt his face soften into a smile. "After breakfast. You need to eat first." "Yay!" Lily slid into her chair, attacking the pancakes Eleanor placed before her with enthusiasm that would have been impossible a year ago. She chattered between bites about ducks and Emma and a science project about butterflies and whether Daddy thought butterflies remembered being caterpillars. Eleanor caught Marcus's eye across the kitchen. The former Navy SEAL stood by the counter, nursing his own coffee, watching the scene with an expression of quiet wonder. He shook his head slowly. "Who would have guessed?" he murmured. "A year ago, if someone had told me." Eleanor smiled, the kind of smile that comes from witnessing miracles. "Love doesn't need anyone to guess," she said softly. "It just needs to happen. People say family is blood. They're wrong. Family is the people who choose to stay when they could walk away. Family is the people who see your darkness and bring light anyway. Family is not where you come from. It's where you belong. I lost my first family to violence and tragedy. I buried my heart with them and thought it would never beat again. But a 7-year-old girl with eyes too old for her face taught me something I had forgotten. Hearts don't really die. They just wait for the right person to wake them up." The park was crowded with families enjoying the spring sunshine. Children ran across green grass, their laughter mixing with birdsong and the distant splash of the duck pond. Dominic Vance walked along the winding path, his hand wrapped around much smaller fingers. Lily skipped beside him, pointing at every flower, every butterfly, every cloud that looked like something magical. "That one looks like a bunny, Daddy. See the ears? I see them. And that one looks like a dragon. A friendly dragon. Very friendly." "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart." Lily stopped walking and looked up at him with those eyes that had seen too much pain and now saw so much hope. "I'm glad you found me." Dominic knelt down, bringing his face level with hers. The man who had killed without hesitation, who had built an empire on fear, who had lived as a shadow for 4 years. That man was still there, would always be there. But he was no longer alone. "I'm glad I found you too, my daughter. More than you will ever know." Lily threw her arms around his neck, and Dominic held her close, right there in the middle of the park, surrounded by ordinary families living ordinary lives. They weren't ordinary, they never would be, but they were family. And that was everything. The shadow and the light walked together toward the duck pond, hand in hand, two broken souls who had found each other in the darkness and learned to heal together. Behind them, their shadows stretched across the grass, no longer separate, no longer alone. One tall, one small, forever intertwined. Friends, if this story has touched your heart the way it has touched ours, if it has reminded you of the incredible power of love to heal even the deepest wounds, we hope you will take a moment to subscribe to our channel and join our family of listeners. Every like, every share, every subscription helps us bring more stories like this to people around the world who need to hear them. We want to know what you felt watching this story unfold. Did it remind you of someone in your life? Did it make you think about the meaning of family? About second chances? About the light that can emerge from the darkest places? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your words from the heart mean more to us than you could ever know. The lesson of this story is simple but profound. Family is not defined by blood. It is defined by choice, by love, by the willingness to stay when staying is hard. And no matter how broken we become, no matter how much darkness surrounds us, there is always the possibility of light. Sometimes that light comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person we think we are saving is actually saving us. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of our community. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in your daily life. May you find your own light, and may you be a light for someone who needs it. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.